Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, as delighted as can be to be here with you on a Friday when we've got two fantastic guests. Recently, there's a document from the Vatican, and to speak colloquially, we don't have to get into the office and all that, and it's called Dignitas Infinita. I think I'm pronouncing it wrong. And okay, people talk about these and go, we got a perfect guest to talk about it. Philosopher, theologian, priest, Father Sebastian Walsh. What's in the document? How do you read a document like this? What should we make of it? If you've been hearing things and reading things and you just want someone who's just perfect as far as being prepared and also just having the temperament to read church documents, we'll do that the second hour. So maybe you got questions about Dignitas Infinita, or however it's pronounced, and you can do that second hour. This hour, we're going to talk about the church in the news. J.D. Flynn is here with us, and if you've got questions about things that are happening in the Catholic Church, things you're reading about, things you're seeing on TV, reading about in social media, whatever, J.D. Flynn is here to take your calls and your questions, and if you don't call, I'm just going to talk with him, because I love talking with J.D. He's a canon lawyer. He's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Pillar, which you can find at pillarcatholic.com. And you should. It's a wonderful journalism project focused on the life of the church. It really has become the go-to source for lots of people for journalism regarding the life of the church. JD previously worked in diocesan administration, and he's you worked as a seminary professor of canon law too, huh? Hi, JD.
I love teaching seminarians. Yeah. Not that they're just good folks.
You're good folks, and all you guys at the Pillar are good folks. But we never thought we'd be featured there, and we're not going to talk about that yet. But you all did a story about us. We will get to that later.
I never thought I'd do a story about you. Yeah.
No, one thing I have learned about the news is don't be in it. That's a good policy.
Better to write about it than to be written about. That's for sure.
Don't be in it. If you can avoid being in it, your life's going to be better. The number here is 888-318-7884. Are there things about the life of the church, the news of the church that you'd like to talk about today? J.D. Flynn here to talk with you. 888-318-7884. I want to start with a happy story, if I may.
Great.
And it's by your own Luke Coppin. And it's
okay. Then that's probably great.
It's about France, and these we had a French bishop visit us a few years ago here, and I remember kind of making some kind of joke about French Catholicism, like a little teasing comment, and he said, he goes, don't count out French Catholicism. He said there's signs of renewal that you might be surprised about. And that's what Luke recently reported on. Luke Coppin recently reported on this group that's going around kind of restoring crucifixes and little chapels and whatnot around France. And the young people want to do it. They want to restore their Christian heritage.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a very, very cool story. You're right. This is a movement called the SOS. I'm not going to pronounce it right because it's French, but Calvaries, like Calvaries, the Saving Calvaries, basically. And what they are is a movement of young people who restore these sort of roadside little chapels or little shrines or little crosses that are all over the place in rural France and all over the place in rural Europe. You can see them. But in France, many of them were destroyed during the French Revolution. And then those that survived, many of them have just been neglected for decades, and especially as the practice of Catholicism in France has declined, but most especially as France has urbanized and people have moved out of rural areas and more frequently into cities. These rural roadside shrines, which are quite beautiful, have kind of been neglected and begun to decline. And so these young people go around and they'll have a kind of service day where they will restore them, and maybe it'll take some time. They'll get some woodworkers and things like that to restore them, repaint them, clean up the area around them, and it's beautiful to sort of see this growing in France.
Yeah, and I guess the narrative is just so negative, and I think there's a reason that it's negative. That if you go to Sunday Mass in many parts of Europe, you be almost alone. I mean, there'll be a few people there, and you'll be almost alone. But maybe there's a point at which it stops being interesting to leave the church and starts being interesting to reconsider the church, and people start giving it its reconsideration.
Yeah, I think that's right. We did a different story about France back in March, and it was about the kind of boom in adult baptisms in France. So in 2024, 7,135 people, more than 7,000 people who were adults were baptized in France, and that's a big increase. It's an increase of 30% from 2023, and this is part of a trend that we've seen over the past couple of years, where adult baptisms are just climbing and climbing, and have been since basically 2019. And this means, of course, that um, it is true that fewer babies are baptized in France, that more people choose not to baptize their baby because they don't practice the faith. But there is a growing number of people who find the faith as adults, and largely it seems through new ecclesial movements. So there are kind of two centers of energy in the life of the church in France and in some of the other European countries. One is is traditionalism, people who love the extraordinary form of the Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, and the other is a kind of flourishing of ecclesial movements like the Neo-Catechumenal Way or Communion and Liberation, Opus Dei even, and then some smaller groups as well, which have begun really re-evangelizing parts of France where many young people have never heard the gospel at all.
Yeah, because that's an extraordinary thing as an adult to receive baptism. This is not just a casual interest. This is not just a, every now and then you drop in. This is people who are again taking the faith seriously after so many losses for the faith, generation after generation in France. Luke mentioned that in this latest story as well, and several other things, and then mentioned that the Olympics will be there this summer. There'll be the reopening and rededication of Notre Dame Cathedral, and so there'll be a little bit of attention on France. And I guess the idea is, don't be surprised if you see that there is actually a Catholic faith that's alive, if not thriving in the sense of huge percentages of the population, thriving in the sense of the numbers are going up, not down.
Yeah, that's quite right. So a friend told me about a story, not about France, but about Spain. He was in Spain with his family for Holy Week, and they went to Mass, they went to Easter Vigil, and they thought they'd be the only family there. It was in the crypt of Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, and they thought they'd be the only family there. And at first they were, but sort of little by little as the Mass began, families kind of trickled in. And by the end, the number was about double the size of the congregation that was there when the vigil began. And I thought maybe that was a good sort of illustration of the way in which people are sort of trickling, not in these huge waves, but people are trickling back into the life of the church in European countries where I think many people thought that that the practice of the faith would only continue to decline.
Well, I have to maybe juxtapose that a bit with some of the statistical reporting you do. And really, one of the things that you guys are really good at, I think, at The Pillar is numbers, is looking at numbers, whether it's financial numbers, whether it's, church attendance numbers, baptism numbers. Like you get the numbers tell a story with you guys in a way that in many places it would be more anecdotal. But the numbers are not good in the United States as far as it's not just not good, JD. Sometimes I read these articles and I think, oh my gosh, there's a lot for us to be worried about.
Yes, by the numbers, the church is experiencing a precipitous decline in the life in the United States. That is true, and there's no way around that. And that means a number of things. That means fewer infant baptisms in the United States, fewer confirmations, fewer people getting married, far fewer people being ordained. It means that our clergy, we're on the sort of precipice of both about 1/3 of our diocesan bishops kind of reaching retirement age over the next few years, and about the same size of our priests kind of reaching retirement age over the next few years. So yes, the U.S. is by any number of statistical metrics facing not only sort of decline in religious practice, which I think we knew, but sort of infrastructural and institutional decline. And we can document that with the numbers. What we can't document with the numbers, and what I always try and tell people is, we think it is important to know what the numbers show. We think it is important to have our eyes open about kind of what the the data reality is, but only really so that we can be looking to see what God is doing. And that's the part that we can't document with numbers. But I think if we're believers, then we have to say that at a time where we see statistical decline, we also have to be looking for the places where God is moving and the ways that renewal might, begin in the church as well.
And it is interesting, and we'll take a break in a second here and then let people ask you questions. We're talking about the church in the news. J.D. Flynn is our guest from The Pillar, and you should check out their work. Just put in Pillar Catholic or The Pillar in your search bar. You'll find them, and they do wonderful
PillarCatholic.com. Check us out.
Or just go to PillarCatholic.com. And I suppose when we look at these numbers and like you said, when we then ask that question, what is God doing? It does seem that, even you mentioned it with France, that these new movements that came up in the 20th century are, whether liberal or conservative or however you want to describe them, the new movements are actually a source of life now in the church. They are having a tremendous effect.
Yeah, they are. They are. So the kind of ecclesial movements which mostly began to flourish in the pontificate of John Paul II, and I think the most prominent example in the United States is probably the Neo-Catechumenal Way, which has seminaries and priests all across the country, but other movements as well. They are centers of life in the church. The biggest concentrations of young people in many parts of the church are either, again, there's sort of these two poles, either in movements like Communion and Liberation, which is, sort of very, very something which has emerged only in recent decades, or a growing number of young people who are interested in sort of the traditional Latin Mass and things like that. But those things have things in common characteristic, I think, and most especially these really sort of thick social bonds of community that are not just sort of seeing people at Mass. Survey after survey says that what people feel most despondent about in their life as a Catholic, or what they struggle with the most in their life as a Catholic, is not clerical sexual abuse scandals or clerical financial abuse scandals or sort of doctrinal mealy-mouthedness, but a feeling of being alone, of not being known at their parish, and of not being known by their pastor. And so these movements or pockets that have sort of thick bonds of community are the places where the church is just attracting people very quickly. Now, those movements are also growing up, and as they grow up, like the religious orders of the medieval world, or the missionary orders of the post-Reformation era, as they get into their sort of second and third generation of leadership, they have some growing pains, and they have to kind of work with the Holy See. Sometimes it's easy to do, sometimes it's not easy to do, to work with the Holy See to make sure that they have kind of a healthy leadership culture, a healthy formation culture. And I think we'll see that in some of these movements over the next couple of years, some issues related to their leadership and formation kind of being meted out. But those are signs of vitality too, that the thing has enough legs for those things to need to be addressed.
888-318-7884 is the number. We're talking the church in the news. J.D. Flynn is our guest. Your calls welcome, whether you're Catholic or not. 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
He is honored by the Church as a saint and the first diocesan priest to be declared a doctor of the Church.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. John of Avila was known to his contemporaries as a spiritual master, and he served as a guide to some of the greatest saints of the 1500s. He also called for true reform in the Church and was a role model for the priesthood even today. He died in 1569.
To find out more, visit EWTN.com and click on Catholicism.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. J.D. Flynn is our guest, and you should check out Ed Condon and J.D.'s work and all the folks. One of the wonderful things that's happening over there is you have more and more contributors there. I suppose that's a healthy sign of your growth. At the Pillar, you can check it out at pillarcatholic.com. And I don't know, a lot of people are checking it out. People, you are. A lot of people are using you as the source now for their...
Yeah, we're very blessed. I mean, as far as we can tell, we are one of the most trafficked news websites Catholic news websites in the world, and we feel very blessed by that and very, very grateful for people who read us and who look to our reporters for a sense of what's happening in the life of the church. And really, we are just trying to... The whole of our project is that we love the church, and we want to take the church seriously, both in terms of what she claims sort of theologically and as a human institution. And we try and cover that as well, as smart and as serious as we can, and have some fun while we're doing it.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. Is there some way for you as a journalist to kind of know what are the big Catholic stories in the world at any given time? Like, is there a way to kind of search and go, what's the big Catholic news this week or over the last 30 days or something?
It's so funny that you say that, Ty, because that's always a challenge, right? It's how do we know what's going on outside of our own sort of spheres of contact or spheres of engagement?
Right.
And because I wanted that for myself, we asked our senior correspondent, a guy named Luke Coppin, to produce a little daily news summary for us called Starting Seven. And I don't know if you get Starting Seven, Ty, but it tells me every single day what's happening all around the world in the life of the church. It takes me about 10 minutes to read, and after my breviary, it's the first thing I read every day, and it's designed to do exactly what you're describing.
So what would you say, say over the last, 30 days? What's a big story in the church? Maybe something nobody saw coming that just popped up and got reported all around the world. Anything come to mind?
That's a hard question. What story comes to mind for you?
Father Justin. I was trying to get you to say it, and you're like being polite.
Father Justin, gosh. What a beautiful, a short priesthood, but every priesthood is a beautiful priesthood. So what a short and beautiful
short priesthood. All right. So I'm just curious because I know what happened on our end, but there you are sitting in your office. How do you go, this is on the radar now. We got to pay attention to this. Like when something like that happens.
Well, what we know that something is going to be of interest to a lot of people when our phones start blowing up. Oh. So I can't tell you, after you guys launched the Father Justin Catholic Answers AI apologetics robot priest, I started getting just so many texts from people, lay people, priests, religious, bishops, all saying, like, did you see this thing? And each with their own viewpoint on it. But I thought, okay, this is going to be the kind of thing that people want to pay attention to. So I reached out to Catholic Answers. I asked if I could do an interview about it. And I thought it was a really good conversation in which I learned more about what you guys were doing. And what I think is, what I appreciated about that is, I like that Catholic Answers, and I'm not saying this for any reason except I think it's true. I like that Catholic Answers is entrepreneurial and tries new things. Now, I think you guys have heard all the other viewpoints on it, but I will say I like that you try new things, and I know that's what you were going for there.
Well, why did you hear criticisms? I hadn't heard. I hadn't heard any. We all had fun with John Sorensen's interview he did with you because he kept saying for one thing, you got to love working for a boss who takes all the blame himself, who goes, "This was me, right. This was mine. I did it. I decided." Yeah. And even if it's not entirely true, he took the hit for everybody. And then he kept saying, "I've just got to take my lumps." And I think you even put that in the headline.
He said that, I think, 4 times in our story, so I had to put it as the headline.
Yeah.
Well, and he took them. Father Justin probably. And the cool thing about Father Justin is he sort of has been a unifying force in American Catholicism because just about every tribe of American Catholics has
hated him,
has had a view, shall we say, on Father Justin.
Well, he's not Father Justin anymore. And
right.
Then, of course, the jokes started and it went around the world. I saw the headline, robot priest laicized. I saw it in Indian newspapers, in British newspapers, in the New York newspapers. That's a pretty hard headline to resist.
Well, somebody said to me that in the spirit of laicized priests everywhere, he's probably going to marry the robot parish DRE and then kind of show up back up in the parish again after that. So we'll see what the future holds for Father Justin.
But one of the real beauties of this for us is we've gotten to speak with very interesting people who are in the world of AI, who have reached out to us, and also some folks in the church who have been thinking about how to make use of these things. Some of whom are critics, some of whom are cheerleaders, but it's actually a very interesting conversation. And I wonder, and whatever you say, it's fine. We've taken every kind of criticism, but do you think that? I do think it was entrepreneurial to give it a shot, but is this something that the church is going to have to figure out how to use, or is it something that, in your view, we're just going to have to stay away from? And I don't mean Father Justin. I just mean the AI stuff in general.
Yeah, from my point of view, I am pretty cautious about kind of these large language learning models for two reasons. One, yours actually got, to its credit, got a lot of questions right, and I tried to throw it some sort of curveballs, and it didn't hit all the curveballs, but it hit a surprising number of them. But if you kind of play around with ChatGPT or things like that, you realize a lot of the time these models are just pulling things out of the air, and so it's hard to know what's true and what isn't. And I think people have talked about us that we're living in a sort of post-truth world in which, for a lot of reasons, it's hard to know what's true and what isn't, and what the value of truth is. And Benedict, of course, warned us about the dictatorship of relativism. And I think one thing to learn to be most kind of concerned about is not the anthropomorphization of the things, but just this question of, do they make it harder for us to get at something which is already very difficult for us to get at in the contemporary world, which is truth. Mm-hmm. Lots of ideologues want to sort of spin truth into something which is, which befits their own narrative, and we have to be cautious about that. And then when we're sort of using models which, because of their deficits of their programming and their limits of their capacity and stuff, just will frequently say things which aren't true, without any malice, but just because of the way they're designed, does that make it harder for us to even just believe that we can know the truth? And if we become despondent about the question of whether we know that we're in the truth, will we enter into sort of a deeper cultural existential crisis about whether the truth can even be known?
Yeah,
that's what concerns me. So I don't know. I mean, on the other hand, a lot of kids find them helpful for their term papers, I guess.
Yeah, they do. And frankly, organizations like yours are using them to write the news stories. I'll go to ESPN or something to read about a basketball game, and you realize that a computer can write a perfectly good article about it'll tell you it'll get the statistics in the right place. It'll take the quotes from the press conference and the little interviews they do after and put them all in the right place. So it's kind of freaky.
It's true, but it's really interesting because a computer can write a perfectly serviceable article about a basketball game. You're right. It can kind of take the box score, and it can turn that into a narrative, and it can then take things from the press conference and all of that. But it can do that and at the same time miss the game entirely, miss that the entire game turned around because of some monster block, or that the game – that the team built momentum after being on an 8-game losing streak, and like beating this team at this time could be the thing that really turns around their season. Like the stuff that comes from, cognition can be missed entirely. And so we just get a very sort of thin account of things, even when we get an accurate one. That's what I feel like at ESPN.com all the time now. It's like, I could have just read the box score because I read the write-up, but I didn't learn anything about like the game. And sometimes like somebody's line for the game, like, okay, they almost had a double-double, but they didn't, but sometimes like you need to hear what was going on in the game to understand the statistics about their play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah, you're right. It's serviceable, but it's not the same. It's not. And I tried it, and I've tried it several times using ChatGPT because we do a game show here. And so I got to come up with 20 good questions for the game show. And so I just ask it, give me 100 multiple choice questions about, Catholics and Protestants or something. And I'll tell you, I'll go through those 100 multiple choice questions, and often there's not even 2 or 3 that are usable for me. And then,
Yeah.
and maybe the way that I do the query, but even those I have to rewrite in order to make them kind of, I don't know, have a little bit of bounce to them, a little something that makes them interesting on the air.
That's right. Yeah. So it can be kind of thin because I mean the whole model is a model of predictive text, right? What do I expect that something would say based on this text I've consumed? Well, if everything is predictive text, then it's boring because it's repeating old tropes and cliches by design, right? So there's nothing sort of new or insightful there.
The number here, 888-318-7884. We'll get to callers for JD, and I got more news stories to ask him about. JD Flynn is our guest, and we're talking about the news of the church in the world, or the news of the world as it affects the church, whatever, however you want to construct that. If you want to ask JD, call 888-318-7884.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Are you scared to talk about abortion? Don't worry, almost everyone is. You can overcome this fear as Trent Horn shows in the newly revised and expanded second edition of Persuasive Pro-Life. With a little knowledge and a few proven techniques, you can become a bold and effective apologist for life. Visit shop.catholic.com to order your copy of Persuasive Pro-Life and never again be afraid to speak up. Also available at good Catholic bookstores. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Hey, the big conference is coming up in September. I haven't talked about it much, but if you're free on the last full weekend of September each year, we do our big apologetics conference, and this year we're doing it on the parables, the sayings, the conversations of Jesus himself, and a great opportunity to talk about the Lord, to talk about how he talked, and that can give us so much instruction on how we might approach our conversations today. And try to beat it. You got Kimberly Hahn, Scott Hahn, Father Sebastian Walsh will be there. Dr. Billy Junker will be there. All of our apologists will be there. We'll do the radio show there. We just have a great time. Check it out. It's, as I said, the last full weekend of September right here in sunny San Diego. CatholicAnswersConference.com is the place to go. CatholicAnswersConference.com. Our guest this hour is JD Flynn, canon lawyer and co-founder and editor-in-chief of The Pillar, which you can find at pillarcatholic.com. I think you were checking on the break to see how the story about Father Justin did relative to your other stories. How
yeah,
did we
it did
do?
pretty good. I will say there was a pretty high level of interest in our Father Justin coverage for sure.
All right. Well, thank you for the fair coverage.
Well, it was good to just talk with John. I just wanted to let him sort of put the Catholic answers out, and I'm glad we were able to do that.
Well, one thing about John, I got to tell you, is he was the most humble person about that. Like we'd say, somebody would give some criticism, and sometimes the criticisms were a little over the top, but John would say, well, that's good data for us. That's good information. That'll help us make it better. He'd be like, aren't you going to be mad at anybody, John? Nope, he wasn't. I did want to ask you about, did you see, everybody seems to be talking about that AP story on Catholics.
Yeah.
All right, secular press reporting on Catholics. I'll have my antenna up for what are they going to say. But I don't know. What did you think about the big AP story that came out?
I thought it was pretty fair. So this was a story maybe a week ago that kind of looked at the sort of some trends as the AP understood them, the Associated Press understood them in the life of the Church in the United States, and basically said, look, among this ain't your sort of grandma's felt banner church anymore. That young people are more, and then it kind of conflated. It definitely could say young people are not the progressives of the 70s and 80s, but it couldn't quite say exactly what they were. And part of the way you could tell that is it sort of conflated lots of different sort of ecclesial movements and threads. So it was like the traditionalist group Focus, and if you know anything about Focus, they're like, this is a movement sort of born out of a bunch of Steubenville graduates who are pretty, themselves sort of charismatic and evangelizing in that way. And to call them traditionalists just says, okay, these guys didn't quite understand it. So I think there were a lot of ways in which it didn't quite get the nuances of some, I think, important sort of trends emerging in the life of the church today. But the big picture, which is that younger people are more desirous of orthodoxy, with a couple of different expressions, I think it got right. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I sometimes feel that this idea of conservative and liberal is a lens that we just can't stop looking through. And I almost wonder, is there such a thing as a Catholic who could neither be categorized as liberal nor conservative? And I don't know that there is, because for the AP, any normal Catholic is going to be very conservative to them, because a normal Catholic is going to believe things, for example, about human sexuality that seem wacky right wing to the AP.
Yeah.
So that lens gets very tiring.
Yeah, but at the same time, Catholics who hold the teachings of the church are going to hold what the church has said since Leo XIII about like the rights of workers, and that corporations exist for the good of their employees, and for human flourishing, and that governments have an obligation. So Catholics who hold the teachings of the church across the board are going to hold these kind of like ideas that make them seem like righties and ideas that make them seem like lefties. And I think we in America just want to say like, okay, but which ones are they really? And it helps me a lot. One of the good things that I really appreciate about our work is that we get to know Catholics from all around the world. And as I've gotten to know a lot of Catholics from sub-Saharan Africa, it helps me a lot to see, okay, these guys hold the teachings of the church, but in a completely different context, where, they're, in many regards, in many of their societies, they're often viewed as like kind of dangerously progressive because their societies are very, very politically conservative in some ways. So it's all, those kinds of labels are not particularly effective, I think, at describing what's true about Catholics or what isn't. The most important question is, do we hold and live the teachings of the Catholic Church?
Right. That's exactly right. And I'd like you said it about Focus. The story is maybe a little more complex than you could do by just taking a dip. I mean, one of the problems I think with media reporting, secular media reporting on the Catholic Church is, we check in every few years. There's not regular reporting that can give you a sense of the richness of Catholic life.
And I have to say, I spend every day of my life reporting on the Catholic Church, and I think I'm missing huge swaths of Catholic life. Like, I wish I had a newsroom of 100 people, because I'd love to cover lots of elements of the life of the church in depth and seriously and really well. And so then outlets make a choice. Either they sort of deep dive on a few things, or they cover everything at surface level. And we've chosen, for the most part, to kind of deep dive on a few things and to make that kind of our MO. But lots of other outfits have kind of chosen to cover everything at a surface level. But boy, do I wish that we had the resources to cover lots of elements of the life in the church in the United States with a lot of depth.
Well, people can just go to pillarcatholic.com and become supporting members. They can.
Yeah, that would be great.
I don't know if they know that.
We'd have more. We're just bringing on a Rome correspondent, which I'm super excited about, because, as you can imagine, there's a lot to cover intelligently and soberly in Rome.
Really?
So I'm very excited about that. But yeah.
All right, let's get a caller on here. Kenny's in New York City. New York City, watching on YouTube. Kenny, go ahead with your question for J.D. Flynn.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Very well, yes. You don't have a New
Yes.
York accent at all.
Hello. Yes, Dr. Lewis, if I possess me, the Pope smokes dope. Allahu Akbar.
I'm tempted to say that might not have been a serious call. I'm pretty thick on these things, but I think that might not have been a serious
But
call.
what I want to give Kenny credit for is he stayed on hold for a pretty long time to offer that brilliant observation.
Good for you, Kenny.
So thank you,
Good
Kenny,
for you.
that. Yeah.
You're a real soldier for the
Fortitude.
cause, Kenny. Good for you. You're not a quitter. The number here is 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Okay, well, I just said that thing that I said about liberals and conservatives, but the man whose name is unpronounceable, I don't know if anybody knows how you're supposed to pronounce Ross Douthat's last name. Do you think that's a rough approximation?
I think you did it, yeah.
Do you think I did it?
Yeah.
All right.
I did.
He says liberals and conservative Catholics. Did you see that article in the New York Times? We just need to get used to living with one another because neither of us is going away. I'm not exactly sure.
I don't think I did see that, but that's true. I suppose that's true.
It's not bad.
Yes.
Like, that's not a bad thing. Like, the church is not supposed to be some exclusive club that you have to have a particular political view to be in.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And obviously, it's not new for there to be a broad spectrum of political ideas among practicing Catholics, and there's room in the life of in the teachings of the church for a panoply of a broad spectrum of political ideas within a framework, right? So there are certain things which we know to be true, and I think the extremism of politics today makes it harder. I mean, it is very difficult for a Catholic to make a judgment about who they would vote for if they were looking for someone who supports the dignity of human life from conception to natural death, because the extremism and the culture of death in both of the major parties in America make that impossible. And so I think we're probably in new sort of voting territory for American Catholics, but there's room, I think, in theory at least, for a broad spectrum of sort of political ideas within the framework of Catholicism.
The number 888-318-7884. J.D. Flynn, our guest, the editor-in-chief of The Pillar. We're talking about the church in the news. If you've got questions or if you just want to share a comment and have JD give his response, you're very welcome here. If you got a story that you've been paying attention to that you'd like to know what JD thinks about from his exposure to the church in the news, you are welcome. 888-318-7884. We're going to take a very quick break. We'll come back with more calls for JD Flynn on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Turn to Mary, the Mother of God, for help bearing witness to the gift of life with the National Life Rosary. Designed exclusively for EWTN, the unique centerpiece and crucifix represent the reality that all life is sacred and begins at conception. Help build a culture of life with the National Life Rosary, available now at EWTNRC.com. EWTN is the global Catholic network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Hey, second hour, Father Sebastian Walsh is going to be here, and we're going to talk about tell me how to say it. Dignitas Infinita?
Dignitas Infinita.
Okay.
I would say Infinita.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you there. I mean, while we're bringing that up, I mean, is Pope Francis, is his pontificate hard to cover? And I mean it in this way, that no matter what you say, you're going to make almost everybody mad. like it just seems like everybody's mad about, if you say one thing, people are mad, say the other thing, people are mad. I don't know.
Well, the good news is we try not to have takes on Pope Francis. We try to just explain what it is that he's trying to say, which does make everybody mad.
Yeah.
I mean, it does make everybody mad.
Because then people are like, why didn't you have a take?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. But with Dignitas Infinita, it was it's interesting because it's a by a lot of accounts, it's a very, very good document, a very clear document that affirms a lot of elements of the teaching of the church. But the framing of it was very interesting from the Vatican because, last year, right around Christmas time, Fiducia Supplicans came out, which had to do with blessings for same-sex couples, and a lot of people were very displeased about that. And right after it, Cardinal Fernandez, the prefect of the CDF, said, well, listen, if you didn't like that document, we've got another one coming that you're really going to love. It was like, it was kind of like, listen, there are people who like that one, but if you weren't in that camp, we got something for you. I know you're going to love it. It's going to be great. So it's just kind of funny how they're sort of, the Holy See probably knows too what the segments of practicing Catholics are and what they're looking for and that sort of thing. So
is the Holy See terrible at media, or is that are they terrible at media?
It's first of all, I say that as a criticism in love.
Sure.
The Dicastery for Communications is the most, it has the biggest budget of any department of the Vatican. So the CDF doesn't have a bigger budget. The Congregation for Bishops doesn't have a bigger budget. I suppose the Secretary of State does because their budget's not consolidated. It's broken up into parts. But the Dicastery for Communications has a big, big, big budget. And what they do for that is effectively not answer questions from reporters, not clarify questions that arise, and periodically make these big media faux pas. So there's been a promise to sort of professionalize over time, and there's some good professionals who work there, to be sure, but there's been a promise to sort of modernize and streamline a lot of the ways that they engage with media, and it just sort of hasn't manifested. So, when you're covering a story about the Vatican, you always write to the Holy See for comment, but to be honest, they don't even acknowledge those requests, and they sort of don't. They could be much more proactive with media in a way that would allow them to, I think, get fairer coverage, but it's just not, whatever they're doing with that money, that's not a priority for them.
It's Pope Francis is obviously kind of exciting to the media. Like he's great news. He's great copy, so to speak.
He was. I think there's honestly a kind of Francis fatigue effect.
Okay.
Because what has happened now is like sort of everyone knows that the Pope will be on an airplane and say something controversial, and then there'll be this sort of flare-up effect of it. And at least in Catholic media, I know there's sort of like an increasing frustration with a cycle that feels like the Pope will say something that's controversial. There will be a great deal of sort of secular coverage of it. There will be an expectation that Catholic media kind of clarify it, and then the Pope will maybe kind of walk it back or clarify it. But that cycle just kind of comes and comes and comes. So there's to some extent a kind of fatigue there. And the Pope does not as often preach anymore at large masses or release daily mass homilies and things like that. So the sort of ongoing catechesis that people look to in papal coverage is a little bit less present, and then there's just these sort of controversial things that come up. So.
Well, he seems to. We had Pope John Paul II, who clearly he remained Pope through his declining years all the way to death. Pope Benedict did not do that. I don't know what the current Pope's intention is, but he's certainly much more frail than he was when he started. And
he is. If you see the Pope in person, he is much more frail. He's lost a lot of weight. His gait is very fragile. And one story that I think has gone undercovered in the life of the church is that for the past couple of years, the Pope has refrained from publicly serving as a celebrant for liturgies, from publicly celebrating masses. And so people wonder if that's a sign of the profundity of his health problems or something like that. He's concerned that he wouldn't be able to sustain the celebration of the Mass. JP2, if you remember, celebrated Masses from a chair, a kind of modified wheelchair in the last years of his pontificate. And so the question is, maybe Pope Francis doesn't feel as comfortable with that as an option, or maybe he is concerned about his mobility in some way, but he has not celebrated publicly been the celebrant for masses. I think even at the funeral of Benedict XVI last January, he sat in choir, which is to say he sat in a cassock and surplice and probably a cope, but he wasn't the principal celebrant. And so that, I think, bespeaks probably for a priest, that's a serious thing. So I think speaks probably a pretty serious set of health issues.
So is it unseemly then? I mean, you feel like it's unseemly, but people are going to start talking about the next pope now. I mean, once the pope starts to show signs of his age, I guess would be the way to say it. I mean, he's 87, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, people live to 100.
No, I think it's natural. Yeah. I mean, with an 87, if there's been an 87-year-old person in your family side, you know that it's the sort of thing where they could go very quickly and the family wouldn't be surprised, or they could live for another 10 years and the family wouldn't be surprised. It's just the sort of unpredictability of that stage of life. But I do think it's natural that people start to wonder and have conversations about, okay, where is the church going, and what will the cardinals look for, and how who will be the next pope, and what will people look for in the criteria of the next pope. And certainly those discussions are happening. Cardinals are not supposed to kind of collude together ahead of a conclave or make agreements together about how they'll vote or those kinds of things. But they certainly have discussions about what they think the church needs in the next pope. And we know those conversations are going on now among cardinals in Rome and then cardinals in other parts of the world as well.
And when you look at the makeup of the College of Cardinals, I mean, how long has the Pope been Pope? Is he coming up on? It's past 10 years now, right?
A little more than 10 years, yeah. So he celebrated his 10th in 2023.
So does that mean he's he's named most of the cardinals in the college?
Yeah, so at this point, we did some data reporting on this. I could look for it, but I can tell you sort of off the top of my head that at this point the Pope has appointed, I think, about 2/3 of the voting cardinals, and so he has, to be sure, sort of shaped the College of Cardinals in his according to his own judgment. Now, what's interesting about that, though, is that the Pope has chosen cardinals from parts of the world that are not sort of typically cardinalatial sees. For example, in the United States, we can think of Cardinal Joseph Tobin, who was actually the Archbishop of Indianapolis when he was created a cardinal and then moved to the Archdiocese of Newark. But
our cardinal here in San Diego, we've never had a
your cardinal in San Diego. That's another great example. San Diego is not a place that typically has a cardinal. So whether it's Indiana or whether it's Mongolia, the Pope has chosen sort of far-flung places from which to appoint cardinals from the perspective of the Holy See. And in some cases, it seems he knows them well. He certainly knows Cardinal Tobin well, or Cardinal McElroy. But in other places, it seems that the Pope has chosen them because they lead these far-flung sees, or sometimes they're churches that are persecuted or things like that. So it's not clear, very honestly, how well the Pope sort of knows all of the people who he has appointed as cardinals, or whether it was their personal characteristics that led him to appoint them, or just their geographic locales. And so that could create, I think, a lot of unexpected coalitions, or a lot of unexpected sort of voting trends in the conclave. Now, we won't ever get a really good breakdown of that because the conclave proceedings are secret, but I do think even while the Pope has appointed the majority of the voting cardinals, that doesn't tell us a whole lot, or it doesn't tell us as much about sort of their theological disposition as you might think.
So when you add it all up, what you know and what you've seen in your reporting, who's going to be the next Pope? Just tell me now.
Well, if I tell you now, then I won't.
You can ruin it. I don't care.
I laid down some money on that. What I actually did say is to just check my own suspicions about that. I was recently talking with this AI priest, and I asked him,
knock it off. That's not. Come on. Give me. All right. I just want odds. I'll throw out some cardinals. You give me odds on them. Let's start with the guy in Mongolia. What's the chances we finally, after 2,000 years of waiting, finally get a Mongolian?
It's time,
Pope.
And especially
it is time.
If you've had Mongolian barbecue, or if you like horses, you know that Mongolia has a lot to offer the world.
By the way, when you say like horses, you mean to ride them, because you said barbecue and then horses.
Those are separate ideas.
Yeah, I just want to make clear we're not having a special moment here of that you're going to hear about later. But yeah. So,
although you know that in some parts of Italy, horses are a delicacy. Like in northern Italy, horses is a pretty common sort of delicacy.
But
that's neither here nor there, I suppose. Yeah.
No,
it's quite good.
In some parts of the U.S., they shoot dogs. At least I heard that recently. But so you didn't give me a percentage shot. What are the odds on finally getting a Mongolian Pope?
I let's put him in the sort of 5% category.
5%. That's pretty a 1 in 20 chance that we get a Mongolian
That's
pope.
low.
I'm going to take care of my health because I want to be
Well,
around
we
to see
definitely
that.
won't get a Mongolian pope because the cardinal of Mongolia is an Italian. So I suppose we definitely won't get a Mongolian as such to be pope. But
I hope he's not a northern Italian. We don't want him around all those horses in Mongolia if he's from northern Italy. But is there any I know people do the handicap. You probably go to London and bet on who, like, you could probably put money down today on who.
Oh
the
yeah,
next
you
pope
could.
will be.
And the people whom people expect is Cardinal Tagle, who works in the Vatican Curia.
Philippine-
Before that, the Archbishop of Manila.
Okay.
People say that he's a front runner. People. There are a couple of Italian cardinals who people say. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Secretary of State, is increasingly someone who seems to be talked about in those conversations. I think Cardinal Ike of the Netherlands is someone who's frequently mentioned as at least possibly papabile, as they say. So, people are those things are beginning to trickle out. Cardinal Zuppi is another kind of common name which comes up. He's an Italian who's kind of.
I feel like
regarded
somebody
as-
mentioned a Hungarian.
Yeah, so there was a while where the Archbishop of Budapest, Cardinal Peter Erdo, was frequently talked about as a strong candidate for the papacy. I don't know if he's still. I don't hear his name as often in discussions these days, but I think among we talk about the limits of kind of conservative and liberal labels, but among the sort of, maybe we could say, communio theological school, Cardinal Erdo has been regarded as one of the stronger possible candidates.
I'm so grateful that you'll talk about this with me. I kind of thought you were going to be like, no, I'm not talking about that. That's unseemly.
No, why not? I mean, what do I have to lose?
But it's just part of. But then the thing is, you could kind of narrow it down, and then the Pope goes another 10 years. You just never, and then it'll be a whole different cast of characters.
And at any time, conclaves are so tricky. Nobody really expected Wojtyła. Not a lot of people expect. In the 2013 conclave, when Bergoglio was elected and became Pope Francis, the expectation was that Cardinal Angelo Scola of Venice was a lock. I mean, everyone sort of thought that he was a lock because he seemed to be at least the preference of Benedict XVI, and he was known to have been very close with Benedict, and it seemed that he would be the clear and obvious frontrunner. And what happened, Sai, is that right before the conclave, there was a news story in Italy that tied him loosely, that suggested that Cardinal Scola had some associations with some corrupt Italian politicians. And the cardinals went into conclave, and they didn't know how big of a story this was going to be, or kind of whether or not they would come out and this story would have blown up and become something much bigger. And so there was concern about electing Cardinal Scola precisely because of that. Now, it turned out to be kind of nothing, a little nothing burger of a story. But because they don't have phones or the internet or newspapers or anything in the conclave, they didn't know that, and so that really impacted their voting choices.
Are there places where a new pope can't come from? Like, I wonder, could an American be the pope? Could a German? Or are there places where it's like, no, it's just...
there's a lot of conventional wisdom that says that an American will not be elected pope, but I don't know about that. I think the right American. It all has to do with what the College of Cardinals thinks the Church needs, and who they see that, and the extent to which they know each other. One challenge right now for the College of Cardinals is there have been very few consistories in Rome, gatherings of cardinals, and so they don't really know each other as well. And so the sort of first few days of before the conclave will be critical for them to get to know each other. And the rules of voting have changed a little bit to kind of favor the front runners. There are more votes at the beginning than there once were, and that allows for less discussion inside the conclave. And so that sort of lends towards people who have big names, even among the College of Cardinals. So I don't know. Under those circumstances, it's possible that an American could be elected pope. I think one common misconception that's worth understanding is that I think people commonly perceive that the Holy Spirit chooses the Pope, and the Holy Spirit certainly guides the Church, but the Church doesn't teach that the Holy Spirit chooses the Pope, rather that the cardinals make a prudential judgment of their own accord.
All right. Well, I am so grateful that you took the time with us. I'm really glad that you had that conversation with me. It's nice to get a little behind the scenes with a journalist who knows what's going on in the world to get the take. And a 5% chance on a Mongolian makes me pretty happy. Thanks, J.D. Flynn.
Well, that was great. Good talking to you, Si. Thanks for having me.
J.D. Flynn, you can find his work and the work of his colleagues over at The Pillar. You go to pillarcatholic.com. Do go to pillarcatholic.com. Make it one of your news sources. It'll make a big difference for you. Coming up, we're going to talk about Dignitas Infinita with Father Sebastian Walsh. Please hang on, and we'll do that. Hello and welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. As promised, Father Sebastian Walsh is our guest this hour, and you may have heard about the new document from the Vatican, Dignitas Infinita, and we'll get the correct pronunciation of that from Father momentarily. But, you know, as with everything that comes out of the Holy See, it got a good deal of attention. But in particular, things are getting a close scrutiny these days, even documents that might otherwise not get quite as close as scrutiny. So we thought, well, who's best to give us a close-up look at this document, at what it means, and about how to read such documents. Father Sebastian Walsh is a Norbertine priest of the Abbey of St. Michael up in the Diocese of Orange, and he's a graduate of Thomas Aquinas College here in California, and they graduate lots of wonderful people. You should check them out. He's also a graduate of the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., where he received his license in philosophy. He went to the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome. He can't get away from St. Thomas. That's the Angelicum, where he got a master's in sacred theology and a doctorate in philosophy, and that's a lot of good preparation for talking about a papal document. Father Sebastian Walsh, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Cy. It's good to be back with you.
And when as a philosopher, this is kind of your field. This is what you studied.
The title of my thesis, the whole long title is The Primacy of the Common Good as a Root of Personal Dignity in the Doctrine of St. Thomas Aquinas. So it's specifically the very topic that I wrote about.
So here we have this new document that comes right into your wheelhouse, so to speak. Then, and how do you read such a document when you get it as a priest, as a theologian, a philosopher? So here's a new document. What's your mindset as you sit down to read it?
Well, obviously, having researched the topic more, I think I'm able to read between the lines a little better than a typical person. I just sit down and I read, and more I'm interested in the principles than in all the conclusions that are drawn, just to see where the principles come from and what they mean. So, for example, there are a few things in the document. There's a distinction between ontological dignity and moral dignity, it's called, and I realize that seems to be taken from J.F. Crosby, his work. What was the name of that work? I think On the Selfhood of the Person. It was published, I think, in 1996. So some of these things where I'll recognize, okay, this is where that terminology comes from. Here's the background of some of these principles. So that's maybe the difference between when I read the document and someone else who hasn't done a lot of research in that area.
I have to say, Father, I don't know if you're in a community of priests there, and I don't know how much social media you consume and all that, but it does seem that there are a good number of people who will immediately criticize a document that comes out, and they'll say it didn't get this, sure, it didn't get it right on the death penalty, or this is not the proper use of the word infinite, or there was a third one that I'm forgetting at the moment, but there. I wonder if you could just say something about is that the proper way to approach a document from the Holy See to see if you can find errors?
Well, obviously, the first thing that you're supposed to do in reading a document from the Holy See, if you're a believing Catholic, is to see what the Church is teaching us. We come, imagine a schoolhouse in which all the students were suspicious of the teacher constantly. And as a result, instead of being there to learn, they were there to teach, or at least there to contradict the teacher, So we have to listen. I mean, if you don't listen, then you can't even have a constructive argument, even if you do disagree, because you don't even know what they're saying, So the first thing is to listen to understand, And then from there, you can ask yourself, how do I understand this better? And try and make clarifications, because clearly, I often say, one thing a document can't do? It can't answer questions. You can't ask a question of a document. And so it's perfectly legitimate, to ask questions about a document once you've read it well enough to try and understand it. And then you see there are certain possible ambiguities, misunderstandings that could arise. And at that point, it's important to then ask the questions about, well, what does this mean? What does that mean? And I think that's part of the reason, of what I'm doing today. I'm trying to just help the listener, the viewer there, to be able to say, okay, what does this or that mean in the document, and try my best to interpret it in a way that's continuous with the teaching of the church, the previous teaching of the church, and at the same time helps us to understand more deeply the truths that are found therein.
So, I mean, I suppose the church issues documents for a reason, and so there is. Well, the stated reason for this document had to do with celebrating the anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights after the Second World War, and so this is kind of the church's contribution, so to speak, to the conversation about human rights that's been going on for these, really for hundreds of years, but certainly for the last 75 since the Declaration. But is there a wider reason to publish a document like this? Is this what need is it meeting, so to speak? Do you have a sense of that?
I do. I have a sense that what's happening is that the church is trying to explain the basis for many of its moral teachings. I think that's what's happening here. If you read the writings of an ancient writer, for example, Aristotle, or then coming into the patristic era, or a medieval writer like St. Thomas Aquinas, what you find is a lot of discussion of the good. This is good, this is bad, this is virtuous, this is vicious. There's a lot of discussion of that. And then the discussion would then turn towards things that are what we would call intrinsically evil, right? We'd say that can never be done. And more recently, in the last couple of hundred years, as you mentioned, there's been a move in vocabulary to appeal to human or personal dignity and to say, okay, why shouldn't this be done? It's contrary to human dignity. And so it's kind of a new way of trying to formulate the idea of morally bad acts and sometimes intrinsically evil acts. That old vocabulary is they're trying to use that new vocabulary. In fact, that was the very reason that I wrote my thesis, was to try and bridge the gap between the old vocabulary of the good and the new vocabulary of dignity. So that's the reason. It's trying to explain the foundation, and modern people, modern man tends to be more receptive to language that says this is contrary to human dignity, like slavery is contrary to human dignity. Murder is contrary to human dignity, and exploitation and so forth. And modern people find that more palatable, or at least they find it makes more sense to them than maybe the language that was used before. So I think the church is trying to translate into modern, kind of modern categories, its traditional or perennial teaching, and see if that makes more sense to the modern person.
So that this is a very helpful insight because I hadn't even considered that history. But then that explains kind of the second half of the document, where it will take individual moral issues and say and give the church's position on it, which I found quite helpful. Actually, I to me, who as a non-expert reading it, it was almost like a catechism on morals. Like, this is why we believe this about transgenderism. This is why we believe this about war. This is, and it's a helpful little catechism. But I guess what you're saying is, then I should look at the first part of the document as saying, this is how we root all of our moral thinking in language that will be accessible to a modern person, not to use the old language, but use the modern language. And here's the consequences of all. The second half of the document is, here's the various consequences of that.
I think you're right. I think that's a good read on the document.
And how did the document do all of that?
I think it did a fair job, but at the same time, not without leaving ambiguities, because, it's impossible to write a document that doesn't leave some ambiguities. Obviously, even the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, as voluminous as they were, left some ambiguities. So I think it did a good job. And nevertheless, there are a number of areas I think it could be clarified to kind of help the modern reader understand, okay, what's being said here. For example, you might get the impression that everything that's contrary to human dignity is intrinsically evil, whereas it's clear from the document that's not really the case. And the document makes a distinction among the different kinds of dignity. And that distinction ends up being very helpful in trying to understand, what kind of dignity can be lost, what kind of dignity is inalienable, what kind of dignity is a foundation for certain moral behavior towards human beings, and so forth.
Is it important to say that there are aspects of our dignity, or I don't know if it's aspects or types of dignity, I'm not sure how to talk about it, are inalienable, because we want to make clear that a person can't sacrifice by their actions all of their rights.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it?
I think that's part of it. I don't think that's all of it, but I do think that's part of it. It might be helpful to go back a little bit and to say, well, what does dignity mean, first of all?
Okay.
The word dignity originally came into the English language through Latin, from the Latin word dignus, which means worthy. When we say in the Mass, in the Latin, it says, Domine non sum dignus, Lord, I'm not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Dignus meant worthy. And before that, it etymologically derived from a word deknos, that originally meant suitable or fitting. So the idea of a dignity is having a kind of suitability to receive some good, okay? Which is not exactly the same thing as a right. A right is more like, if you don't give this to me, you're a bad person, you see? Whereas in this sense, it's saying, I have a certain suitability, or there's a worthiness in me, to receive this kind of a good here. And granted that I'm the kind of subject that's worthy and suitable to receive this good, then you have to treat me a certain way, So that's the first notion of dignity there, huh? And then the document goes through and it distinguishes 4 kinds of dignity. Let me see if I can find the paragraph here real quickly. I think it's paragraph, I don't have it here. Oh, here it is. It's paragraph 7. It says there's ontological dignity, moral dignity, social dignity, and existential dignity, okay? And the first 2 are the ones that are the most important. Ontological dignity is the inalienable dignity that you were talking about. It's rooted in our very nature. It can't be taken away no matter what you do, no matter how badly you act. Ontological dignity. Then you have moral dignity, which is the idea of fulfilling your ontological dignity, meaning you're actually becoming worthy for the good that makes you something dignified, a dignified person, huh? And then you've got social dignity, which is to say, am I living in poverty that's subhuman, and am I living according to my dignity? And then there's this last thing called existential dignity, where it talks about, well, someone who may have all the needs of life, but nevertheless, they're depressed. Interiorly, they feel like they're not living a human life because of an interior, lack of peace, joy, or hope, But it's really those first 2, that ontological dignity and that moral dignity that the document first refers to, which I said seems to come from J.F. Crosby, Selfhood of the Human Person, I think 1996. And those are the 2 that the document really focuses on.
Well, we have to take a quick break. I do want to invite folks to call if you've read things about the document, if you've read things in the document that you'd like to ask Father Sebastian Walsh about. You are very welcome to call 888-318-7884. Or if you just have an impression of the document and you'd like to ask, not like do an impression of the document. I mean, if you have received an impression of the document, you're welcome to call and ask 888-318-7884. When we come back, I do want to ask you about 2 things that came up as controversies, and I didn't understand them. One, I think I kind of understand. The other, I don't even know what it means, and that's the one about whether you should use the word infinite in the context of human dignity, and the other one has to do with the use of the death penalty. But I'll ask you about those when we come back. Father Sebastian Walsh, our guest, right back with more on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is Encouragement Conquers All. Justin Fatica interviews experts in encouragement from all walks of life and share how they give and receive encouragement. You can hear Encouragement Conquers All and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world, all in one place, all free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm so happy we're getting to have this conversation on a Friday afternoon with Father Sebastian Walsh. In addition to all the other things I said about Father Walsh, he's also published quite a few books, including some for us here at Catholic Answers. You hear us from time to time give away Secrets from Heaven, Hidden Treasures of the Faith, and the Parables and Conversations of Jesus. We like the book so much, we're having a whole conference that basically steals the title coming up in September, where we're going to talk about the parables and the conversations, the sayings of Jesus. Heart of the Gospel, how the Beatitudes show us God's plan for happiness. Always Catholic, how to keep your kids in the faith for life and bring them back if they've strayed. These are some of Father Walsh's books. But today we're talking about the document Dignitas Infinita, and a lot to talk about. But Father, you've already grounded it in a conversation, a centuries-long conversation that I was not aware of, that I didn't understand the context of it. But maybe you could help me with I truly do not understand the controversy over the word infinite, that some people are very upset that the Holy See would say that a human being has infinite dignity. And what is that controversy about?
Well, the controversy really it rests on a misunderstanding of the different usages of the word infinite, right? So the objection goes something like this. Only God is infinite, and therefore only God can have an infinite dignity. In order to say a human being has infinite dignity, you're claiming he's God. That's basically the thought that goes into that, huh? And the mistake there is to realize that it's true that, simply speaking, and absolutely, only God is infinite in every way, right? But nevertheless, we find not in Pope Francis, but in other saints, doctors of the Church and other saints, assertions that human beings can have an infinite dignity. We find St. Thomas Aquinas referring to Our Lady in virtue of her union with Christ as a Mother of God. She has a certain infinite dignity. Her dignity touches on the infinite, on the divine, because she's a Mother of God. We read in St. Thomas Aquinas. St. John Paul II said that the baptized has a certain infinite dignity in view of their baptism. So what does that mean to understand it correctly? Well, St. Thomas Aquinas uses this interesting expression. He says that man is capax Dei. It's a Latin phrase meaning capable of God. So basically what that means is this. In view or in virtue of our rational nature, we have a natural inclination and a potency and ability to be fulfilled by God himself. And that means that you and I, as opposed to any other animal, right, is able in principle to see God face to face, to be happy as God is happy. Now that doesn't mean that we are exactly equal to God when that happens, but we are in some respect made equal to God as sons of God, sons and daughters of God by grace. And so insofar as our human nature is capable of receiving an infinite good, that means we have a dignity which is ordained to the infinite, okay? And therefore it's not, as long as you make the right distinctions and you recognize, okay, we're not saying that a human being, just insofar as he's a created thing, is infinite, but rather insofar as God has willed to make himself available to unite himself to us in the possibility of the beatific vision, that very possibility involves a certain kind of orientation towards the infinite. And that's what I think that the document means when it says that mankind has an infinite dignity.
I appreciate the answer, and that's very helpful. But also, the habit of mind that comes with an answer like that seems to me helpful. And I just want to ask you about that. That it does seem like that the effort of your mind, almost, it seems like maybe this is a habit of your mind, is to say, how can this be read in a way that's consistent with what the church has already always taught?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Right. Again, that's not just with church documents, it's just charity with other people. You want to try and find out what's true in their position. Now, a fortiori in a church document, right? Obviously, you were, if your father spoke to you, I think you would always say, like, well, let me listen and hear what my dad has to say, even if, he said some false things in the past or whatever, right? So anyway, the fact of the matter is that that's just a matter of just charity. And St. Thomas was famous for that. That when he would have disputes with people and they would raise an objection, he would reformulate their objection in stronger terms than they did.
Yeah.
And then his opponents really respected him. And they're like, he gets me. He understands what I'm saying. And he never let one grain of truth fall to the ground in his opponent's positions. He was so interested in finding truth, wherever it could be found. Anyway, that's just as you say, a habit of thought and a way of being docile,
Yeah, that's what I think. Maybe because the world is so politicized, and there's, we're in the habit of treating authority dismissively and even derisively, and we forget that church authority is of a different category. It can't be treated that way. If to treat it that way is not going to hurt the church; it's going to hurt my soul if I do that.
C.S. Lewis was famous for the saying that in our day and age, authority of every kind is called into question, except the authority of self.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's. Well, let me ask you. I will get to the death penalty one, because I know that many people have concerns about what this document says about the death penalty. As a matter of fact, there seems to be some alarm about that in some quarters. But I want to get to the source of our dignity and ask you about if you would. Because when we talk about the human person, person is a substance of a rational nature. Does our dignity come from our substance? Does it come from our rational nature? Where do we get the dignity according to this document?
Yes. Yeah, sometimes if you read it, you might get the impression that it's insofar as you're an individually existing thing that you have a dignity, but that would be to misread it, because obviously rocks are individually existing things. So that's, and the document clearly doesn't think that rocks have an infinite dignity, right? So what you mean is they quote the classical definition of person from Boethius, an individual substance of a rational nature. It's not an abstract rational nature, it's an individual instance of it, what we would call in the Greek a hypostasis, right? A standing under, right? The thing that thing that acts, that thing that exists in a determinate way. So human nature existing in a determinate way is what has this kind of dignity. Not just a human nature in the abstract, nor an individual just as a thing, as a being, but rather an individual instantiating a human nature. That's really the root there.
I have to say, it makes me a little nervous, because I think that modern people might hear that and think, well, if I lose my rational faculties, or if I have not yet achieved my rational faculties, I don't have that dignity then.
Well, perfect. You exactly formulated it correctly, because there's a distinction between a rational nature and a rational faculty, right? You use the word faculty or power and things like that. And you have a rational nature, even if you lose the ability to reason well. And that's one of the things the document, refers back to, right? It's not about your abilities. It's about the kind of thing you are, right? You're the sort of thing that should have those abilities, even if for the time being you don't, for whatever reason. When you're asleep, for crying out loud, you don't have, the ability to reason. So, but you don't lose your dignity when you sleep, nor do you lose your dignity when you're in a coma, nor do you lose your dignity when you're in a car accident and you can't think clearly, So it's really the nature that's the foundation, not the power or the ability as such of reason, but the nature itself, which is prior to those powers.
We're talking about the document. Infinite Dignity is the English name for it. In Vatican documents are usually given their Latin names, and so Dignitas Infinita. How am I doing on my Latin pronunciation? Is it just horrible to your ears?
Oh, you did it exactly right. Dignitas Infinita. It's perfect. You did it. You pronounced it perfectly.
I'm having a good day. I'm having a very good day. That must be the influence of Father Hugh on me. Years of talking with Father Hugh, I can finally pronounce some Latin words. So Infinite Dignity, I think you said before, ontological dignity is more important than moral dignity. What does that mean, and why is that important?
Well, so the document says...
and I didn't look at the clock. I was having such a good conversation with you. Can you hang on, and we'll do the ads, and then we'll... Yeah. All right.
Absolutely. Get you on the other side of the plate.
That is so undignified, the way I just behaved there. Asking a question and then going to an ad.
Oh, just treating me like some sort of commercial thing.
I know. You're just a product. All right, we'll be right back.
When it comes to Catholic teachings about Mary, there's one question we hear more than any other. Where is that in the Bible? The answer? Everywhere. In Bible Mary, the Mother of Jesus and the Word of God, Father John Weiss opens Scripture to reveal a Mary who has been hiding in plain sight. Order your copy of Bible Mary today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
As we read the Gospels, every Christian faces the question again and again, what does Jesus mean? Getting the answer right is critical to both growth in holiness and fruitful evangelization. Want to know Jesus better so you can introduce him to your friends? Then it's time to get serious about understanding his words. Why not join Catholic Answers for our 10th annual Apologetics Conference? Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from our guests, Dr. Scott Hahn and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, Father Paul Chek, and, of course, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. It'll be 4 days of fun, faith, fellowship, and a live radio show. Seats are still available, but going fast. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 1-888-291-8000 today.
Why We're Catholic is the one book you can hand to anyone to invite them into or back to the Catholic faith. With more than 400,000 copies sold, Trent Horn's book has had a #1 ranking on Amazon.com for 5 years running. Now available in softcover, bulk cases, ebook, and on Audible. Find out what the excitement is all about. Order your copies of Why We're Catholic at shop.catholic.com or visit whywearecatholic.com.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, where the commercials come first, the priests come second. That's just how we do it around here. Sorry about that, Father. You really come first in our hearts. You just don't come first on the schedule. I was asking as we went to the break about you said the two, like the document Dignitas Infinita it gives us 4 kind of types of forms of dignity, and you said the first 2, ontological dignity, which we cannot lose, and moral dignity, which we can lose, are the biggies. Those are the most important ones.
Right. You're right. That's right.
So why is ontological dignity more important than moral dignity? What's the relationship there?
Yes. So you could, if you read that just in isolation, because the document does say that ontological dignity is the most important kind of dignity. If you hear that by itself, what you think is ontological dignity is the best dignity. Whereas in fact, what it's saying is it's the most foundational, that if you lose this, you lose all the others. Does that make sense?
Yes, right.
So if I were to say to you, if you have the choice between losing your ability to breathe and losing your ability to think, right? You would say, well, I think I should probably keep my ability to breathe, because if I stop breathing, I'm going to die altogether. If I stop thinking, then maybe I can get that back again later, but at least I'll be alive,
Yeah.
So your life, your life just as a substance your substantial existence is more important in this sense. It's more foundational. If I lose my life, I lose all the other things that go with it, the perfections.
Right.
But certainly thinking is better than breathing. You see that?
Yes, I see. Yeah, right. So more foundational is not the same as the crown of it. That's is the opposite of the crown of it.
Right. So let me give you an example. This is from paragraph 22 of the document, where it talks about moral dignity here. It says, speaking about the fathers of the church, it says that this perspective on human dignity that understands the image of God is entrusted to human freedom, so that under the guidance and action of the Spirit, a person's likeness to God may grow and each person may attain their highest dignity. You see that? So our moral dignity is something that can be developed and grow, and so we can attain our highest dignity. So here's a way of explaining that to just sort of to an ordinary person. If I say to you, what's better, an ability or the fulfillment of that ability? So for example, what's better, the ability to see or actually seeing? And I think you realize, well, the whole reason for the ability to see is so that you can actually see.
Right.
So it's better to actually see than just to be able to see. You see that?
Right. Yeah, because I could be able to see and there's no light, and that the ability is not doing me any good.
The whole reason for the ability, it's fulfilled in the activity. Do you see that?
Yes.
Ontological dignity is the ability to know and love God, to be united to God, whereas that moral dignity is actually being united to God and being suitable to be united to God. So moral dignity, the ontological dignity, is for the sake of moral dignity, just like the ability to see is for the sake of the act of seeing. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, right.
And so it's important to see that, because people might think, well, moral dignity can be lost, therefore it's no big deal. But actually, you can keep your ontological dignity and end up in hell. But what you really want is your moral dignity, where where you're going to be united to God, and you have the right order of charity in your soul. You love God above creatures. You love God most of all. You love him precisely as a common good to be shared by many. And when you love God in that way, you have that right order of love in your soul, that order of charity in your soul. Now you are suitable, worthy to receive God in the beatific vision.
Father Sebastian Walsh is our guest. We're talking about the document Dignitas Infinita that has drawn a great deal of comment in the Catholic world. These are, it seems to me that sometimes we maybe miss an opportunity with these documents. This seems like something that, at the parish, you could have a reading of it and a discussion of it. I mean, it's helpful to have, not everybody's going to have a Father Sebastian Walsh there to put the whole, but it's not so impossible to get its meaning. I mean, it's not an academic paper. You could study this at the parish level.
I think that's true. The all that being said, it's always helpful to have someone who's skilled in that area and who's done some, has some knowledge in that area to help, for sure. But it's not, as you say, this is not a doctoral thesis. This is written for ordinary people. But at the same time, it could be understood more deeply if there was someone who was there who understood it more deeply. That's all.
And your sense is that the underlying motive here, so to speak, is to allow the church to have fuller conversations, moral conversations with the wider world, to talk about Catholic moral teaching in a way that the world can understand.
Right. Yeah. So from the perspective of the world doesn't hear phrases like the good anymore. They tend to be very subjective. They don't hear phrases like the common good anymore. They hear that and they think totalitarianism and things like that, So because of that, an appeal to dignity, people are aware of their dignity today. And so they say, well, okay, I have dignity, so let's talk about that. I think that's that is a sense. Now, I will say this. The document's very careful about distinguishing the different kinds of dignity, not only those 4 kinds I told you about, but the document's very careful about showing that dignity doesn't mean any just subjective inclination you have. You don't have a right to any object of any subjective desire that you might have. The document's very clear about that, because some people claim that it's against their dignity not to, have sex change operations. It's against their dignity, not to be able to, live in a sinful lifestyle or whatever, right? They have strong desires or inclinations. And then as a result of that, they think, therefore, that's the basis of rights and the basis of saying, like, well, my dignity demands that I get things I feel strongly about, right? And, imagine that, you're in the supermarket and your little child starts screaming for the sugar ice cream or the sugar cereal. And you say, it's against my dignity. I need my sugar cereal, right?
Yes. Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying, though, but that's a hard thing because this is very easy language to turn around and say,
Yes.
well, you're not respecting my dignity because you don't support gay marriage or something like that.
And in fact, Karl Marx, the founder of communism, he was the one who first started talking about the dignity of man, and he said, man's dignity does not suffer a rival of God. So he actually said that it was contrary to man's dignity that there be a God and that we believe in a God. We have to say that man is the highest divinity. Isn't that amazing that Karl Marx would say that? So people can twist the language of dignity, and the document tries very carefully to show, no, our dignity is from another. It's relative to God and God's goodness and the fact that we're capax Dei, able to be perfected and fulfilled by God's own essence and the beatific vision. And at the same time to recognize that the foundations of our rights that are based on our dignity is not from our subjective conscious desires, but from our objective human nature, what we are as human beings, right?
Yeah.
So what perfects us as human beings, And so, for example, we are, as human beings, we're male and female, created in the image of God, and therefore our rights are founded on that dignity, not on the dignity rooted in our human nature, not a dignity, a false dignity, which speaks about what I feel really strongly about.
Yeah. Deborah's in Ontario, Canada, watching on Facebook. Deborah, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Father Sebastian Walsh.
Hello?
Hi, Deborah.
Hello?
Hi, Deborah, you're on the air.
Can you hear me?
Oh, I don't think Deborah can hear me. Could somebody get her on the line? And we'll come back to Deborah. I'm sorry that we weren't able to connect right there, but I'm sure it's not the Canadian phone system. I'm sure it's on the American side, Deborah. Whatever else, you got a fine phone system, and I don't want you to feel that we're putting it down, but we can't hear you right now, or you can't hear us, so we'll work it out. 888-318-7884 is the number, 888-318-7884. All right, while they're working with Deborah, as I said before, it's almost like a catechism of moral issues at the end of this document. One of them is the death penalty or capital punishment. And this seems to really have upset some people. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, let me read to you the section real quick. That's from paragraph 34, right? So here's the line that says, here one should also mention the death penalty, for this also violates the inalienable dignity of every person, regardless of the circumstances. So the objection is, in the past, the church directly addressed the question of whether or not the death penalty was intrinsically evil. Okay? In other words, is it always wrong for the state to give the penalty, inflict the penalty of death upon a malefactor if they've been justly condemned? And the church has over and over again said, no, this is not contrary to the faith. This is something that can be an act of justice. So the problem is if you say the death penalty is intrinsically evil, then you're saying that for centuries, practically 1900 centuries, in fact, that the church has been teaching that an intrinsic evil is a justice all this time. You see that?
Yes.
So that's a big difficulty that people are facing. And some people say, well, it's a development of doctrine. The problem with that position is that it says a doctrine can develop in such a way that evil becomes good or good becomes evil. And that's not development of doctrine, right?
No.
So I think the right way to understand is if you go back to the earlier statements by Pope Francis, right? He changed the catechism. He also explained it in certain other areas. And in his own writings, he says that while it was acceptable in previous ages, it's not now. Now, he never uses a language of intrinsic evil. That is, he never says the death penalty is intrinsically evil. He says it can't be applied in any circumstances. That's what he says in this document. And I think you have to read that as in any modern circumstances. There are no modern circumstances in which you could apply the death penalty today. But he admitted that in the past it was okay at some points in certain circumstances. So granted he's already said that, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense to interpret him now to be saying that it's intrinsically evil, because he would have never said it was okay in the past if he thought that. Okay.
Right.
So
yeah,
I would say it's more of a prudential application to modern circumstances. And, so we listen to the church on that. We don't despise it, but at the same time, we don't have to interpret that as being contrary to the previous teaching of the church. So
it does seem to me that there's a basic. I feel like there's a basic rule here for listening to the church, and which is, if you don't have to say that like if you don't have to say this teaching is wrong, then don't say it. And I don't know if I'm expressing that the right way, but sometimes I feel like if it can be read in a way that's consistent with everything else that's come before, then just do that.
Read it that way. Yeah, I think that's right. And the difficulty, and I've kind of debated and discussed with other people about this very question, and the difficulty that most people raise is, well, you can do that, once or twice, but when there's a constant sort of, studied ambiguity in the language or whatever else, they become suspicious. And I think the magisterium itself should be aware of that and not constantly kind of try and, say things in a way that are hard to interpret as consistent with previous doctrine. I do think that's an important thing. And, and so people at least have a right to express their views to the magisterium and just say, well, you're making it hard for us. We feel like I'm bending in a pretzel to interpret this in a way that's consistent with the previous magisterium. So I do think there's some room for that from the standpoint of the canon law itself says that the faithful do have a right to express their reservations about things when they're formulated a certain way. The African church recently wasn't able to really accept that document Fiducia Supplicans. And the Pope, said, well, it doesn't apply to you, which is kind of a way of saying, okay, fine. I understand that this document doesn't seem to you to be inconsistent with what came before. Therefore, we're not going to even apply it to you. So sometimes there is something that I don't want to completely discount the idea that we should, after listening carefully and being docile, be willing to speak directly to the magisterium, not around everywhere else and whatever, but to speak directly to the Holy Father, to address some of those concerns. But all that being said, as you said before, the whole principle of, you always read something charitably and you always try and interpret it as in keeping with the previous teaching of the church. And if someone tries to misinterpret it or interpret it as radically opposed to the previous teaching of the church, you just say, well, then you've rejected this whole, previous teaching of the church. So
right.
You reject the modern church, you reject the old church. I don't, at that point, you're just rejecting the authority of the church,
Unfortunately, Father, I think that is a kind of a habit now, is that the church doesn't really have of authority as much as it has, it gets to have its voice in the marketplace of ideas as much as anyone else. But we've lost, I think that we have lost a sense of that these things are authoritative for us.
Yeah. And it's important, to be able to, for popes to be able to show convincingly the continuity of their doctrine with previous popes. I think that's an important thing to do. And it's an art, and maybe Pope Francis hasn't, perfected that in such, quite yet or whatever else. But nevertheless, our job is always to try and listen docilely and in a way that if we can interpret it in a way that is orthodox and faithful to the previous teaching of the church, we always do that.
Father Sebastian Walsh is our guest. We're talking about the document Dignitas Infinita. You are welcome to call. I think we'll be able to get Deborah on the line, but we'll take this little 60-second break and we'll be right back. And Deborah, if we can hear one another, we'll have a conversation right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square, sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
May is the month of Mary. How are you planning to honor the Blessed Mother? Whether it's planting a Mary garden in your yard, placing flowers by her image in your home, or adorning a statue of her with a handmade crown, there are many ways to express devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. EWTN invites you to celebrate along with us as we honor our Blessed Mother throughout her month with masses, devotions, TV, and radio specials.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. He's not going to like me saying this, but one of the great gifts, I have learned this in the last year more than I have in my whole life because I got to travel a lot and meet a lot of priests. The priests of the Catholic Church are such a gift to us Catholic people and to the whole world because they've, foregoing marriage, so many of them have had time to study and grow spiritually and intellectually in ways that can be so helpful to us. And man, we're so grateful to get to talk with you, Father, about this document and have your, watch this big word, sagacity. Yeah, I'm no dope. I can use big words.
Wow.
You said, wow.
I just want to hear you translate that into Latin, and then I can go to my rest in peace.
It comes from the Latin sagacious. I don't know actually what the Latin is. All right, Deborah is apparently ready in Ontario, Canada, watching on Facebook. Deborah, I'm sorry that you couldn't hear me before, but can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can slightly hear you, so I'll go ahead with my question.
Okay.
I'm born, raised Catholic. I was blessed with the gift of having faith, and I just have always had a strong faith. It was just a gift I was born with. I can't reconcile how someone else who isn't born with that gift of faith and struggles with faith and maybe possibly leaves the church or never comes to the church, but still works towards, as I heard you say, being a likeness to God. I see in their lives they are a likeness to God. How am I any different from them? I can't reconcile that they won't have, I guess, the chance to go to heaven because they aren't baptized.
That's a good question. So it's interesting because the scriptures from just a couple weeks ago actually in some way address that question. You might remember there's a story about the centurion Cornelius. And Cornelius was an unbaptized pagan Roman. Do you remember that from the Acts of the Apostles?
Yeah.
Oh, she's having a hard time hearing us, Father.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I am.
So that's all right. So when what happens? He's praying and God sees the goodness of his heart. So God sends an angel to him. And the angel says, go to Peter. And then Peter will tell you what to do. And then the Holy Spirit comes down upon them. So they clearly, at this point, this man had grace, the grace of God. Isn't that amazing? And so even though he's unbaptized, he has God's grace, he has the Holy Spirit. Nevertheless, St. Peter says, even though he has the grace of God, he should be baptized. Isn't that fascinating? So, and St. Paul says about those, the pagans, the Gentiles who live as if by the law of God in their heart, show that they already respond in some way to the movements of God's actual grace, okay? So, but it is important to recognize that sacraments are not nothing. You know, is it possible for God to give his grace and therefore share in his life and therefore eternal life in heaven? Can he give someone that grace without the sacraments? Absolutely. God is not bound by his sacraments. Nevertheless, what he has told us is the ordinary means by which we are to be joined to his church and made a member of Christ is through baptism and then through the other sacraments, through the Eucharist and so forth. And grace gives us a share in the divine nature. Baptism gives us a kind of a rootedness in that grace that makes us open to the other sacraments, because God wants us to be instruments of one another's salvation. And therefore, he wants us to be part of that visible outward church, that sacramental order, so that we can all be united, even in this life, in one church, one Lord, one baptism, one Eucharist. So in any case, what that means when all's said and done is that the divine nature ordinarily is communicated by baptism, and even in the extraordinary cases we read about in Scripture, God still wants us to be baptized and to join in that visible outward expression of the body of Christ, the mystical body of Christ, because God did not stay in heaven and whisper to us each individually. He became a man in a physical, visible way in the flesh, so that we might, in a visible, physical church, be able to be united to him in that way. So to answer your question, it doesn't mean that you're better than someone else. God could give grace to someone else that's not baptized. But what it does mean is that God wills everyone to be baptized, even those who extraordinarily receive grace through some other means.
Deborah, I hope you're able to hear that. Thank you so much for the call and the question. We're coming near the end of the hour. We've been talking about the document Infinite Dignity, Dignitas Infinita, that came out recently. Father, if you could maybe just give me the summary of the document. What am I supposed to take away as a Catholic now this document is out? What do I take away from it?
Yes. So the Cliff's Note edition would be this. So we have these different kinds of dignity. The most important kinds are the dignity, as it says, of the ontological dignity, rooted in our human nature as a rational being, capable of receiving God's love, capable of responding to God's love and being united to him forever in heaven. That's the foundation of everything else. And then we are called, by exercising our freedom under the influence of grace with the help of the sacraments, to grow in our dignity, this moral dignity the document speaks about, so that we become actually, not just potentially, actually worthy of and suitable for the great gift of God, ultimately in the beatific vision in the life to come. As a result, when we look at other human beings, we have to look at them through that lens, both the lens of their ontological dignity, and not to treat them as mere material things, the way we find in totalitarian societies or commercial societies that treat us as products or consumers. We have to look at every person, human person, as potentially being a child of God, united to God, and we have to act towards them in such a way as to maximize their ability to their growth in dignity, so that they can finally achieve the perfection of that moral dignity towards which the ontological dignity is ordained. And then it goes through a whole bunch of impediments to that and ways of wrong thinking about that, and says, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. All those things are either going to be contrary to your ontological dignity, or they're going to impede the growth of your moral dignity. That's in a nutshell the teaching of the document.
And one hopes that it was the idea, as we said at the beginning, was to have the document out on I think it was the 75th or 70th, maybe 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The world has gone mad in many ways in the years following the Universal Declaration. I don't think we could get it today if we tried. We need a refoundation, a refounding, or a re-anchoring in the moral life, or we're in big trouble.
Yeah, that's right. And again, the church, by any means possible, is trying to lead people to Christ, and therefore this is one other means for that.
Father Sebastian Walsh has been our guest. Father, may we and our listeners have your blessing before we go.
Yes. Per intercessionem Beata Maria Virginis Romnum Sanctorum benedictio Dei Potentis Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti descendat super vos et manet semper.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the very latest. The next time I will see you will be at the conference here. You're coming to our big conference in September.
Can't wait to see you there.
And I hope everybody will come. Just check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com. That does it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here at Catholic Answers Live.